Welcome again to the Filmumentaries podcast. This is episode 13. It's Jamie Benning here, speaking to you from my home here in southeast London. So for episode 13, I'm going back to an interview I did in March of 2018 with Paul Blake, who was the guy that ended up playing Greedo in the original Star Wars. I originally met Paul when I was invited to a Star Wars trilogy screening at the BFI here in London by Toby Philpott, he of Jabba's left hand. We went there together and watched the films, and I got to go in the green room and meet Garrick Hagan, who played Biggs, and Paul Blake, who played Greedo. I mentioned to Paul that I'd previously done an interview with Toby, and would he be interested in doing something similar. So a few months later, we did just that, and we spoke over Skype. I did intend to make it into a video painting the pictures that he was talking about, but I really didn't have enough material to do that. I have released this previously on my Patreon page, so it's here as a bonus extra. This is not being charged to my patrons. This is a bonus episode, and I figured for episode 13, unlucky for some, I probably shouldn't have a stuntman interview that I was hoping to have in Ben Dimmock. But Ben's going to give me an interview coming towards the end of the year, about middle of December, so hopefully that will be one of the December podcasts. In the meantime, here's my chat with Paul, and I started by asking him about the fact that I'd heard that Anthony Daniels, aka C-3PO, had actually helped him get the gig on Star Wars.
Yes, that's true. Anthony Daniels was very kind, I suppose, in all those years ago in 1976, because we were working together for the BBC in a kids program called Jackanory, and it was a Christmas special called The Christmas Cherries, and I've been trying to find it ever since, and it's one of the few that I can't actually find. So either I was going through some kind of strange parallel world experience at the time, or the BBC have lost records of that particular Christmas special. But anyway, Anthony and I were both in it. I played a sort of minstrel, and I think he was a prince. And after doing that, he rang me up one night at home and said, "I'm doing this sci-fi film. Would you?" And the directors asked me if I know of any other actors who'd be interested in doing it. Would you be interested? And I sort of was desperate for a cup of tea and needed the money. So I said, "Well, thank you very much. Yes, I'd love to go along and audition for them." So that's exactly what happened. So about a few days later, I can't remember all this in great detail, but it must have been a couple of weeks later, I found myself at Elstree Studios very early in the morning. And I think I've told this story many times now, but I walked out onto a sound stage, which was quite impressive because like everybody else, a sci-fi film in 1976 was possibly going to be Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, so I thought I was going to be in a B movie. So I wasn't that enamoured with going out to do this thing. But when I walked out on set, it was quite impressive because the whole of the sound stage was covered in kind of sand and had massive arc lights and a painting of the Millennium Falcon up one end with a few mock-ups of gun turrets. And there was one bloke there, because it was very early in the morning and I hadn't been able to have breakfast or anything. So I went up to him and said, "Look, I've just come from Central Town. It's taken me an hour and a half to get here. It's freezing morning. You couldn't get me a cup of coffee, could you?" So he went off, got me a cup of coffee, and I said, "You don't know anything about this movie that some sci-fi film or other that they're filming here? I'm supposed to be seeing some bloke called George." And he said, "Yeah, I'm George Lucas." So he got me a cup of coffee and offered me the job, which is extraordinary even to this day. So I'm very grateful to Anthony Daniels, and I'm also very grateful to George Lucas's barista skills.
That's brilliant. I'm chuckling away here. I had to mute my own microphone then, try and not spoil the recording. That's great. I actually spoke to a fan last night who's got a bulletin
That's
sheet.
my fan then. How is he?
He's got a call sheet. Well, it's not a call sheet, it's a bulletin sheet that says Friday, February the 13th, 1976.
Wow.
Paul Blake to be fitted with mask with Stuart Freeborn. Amazing that this document still survives. So you met Stuart Freeborn. What was that original fitting like? Did you know what you were walking into here?
No, I had been sent a script by Lucasfilm, which incidentally I've still got, which is incredible, really, because it's sort of a massive script, pink pages, full of dialogue, which you have no idea what's going on. But like every actor, when you get a script, I sort of flick through to my bit. It's like an actor getting offered Hamlet, and you flick through. Yes, that's good on every page. Unfortunately, Greedo wasn't on every page, and he didn't have a name even then. So I flicked through this script and got to the few scenes that I'd been given a bit of dialogue in, and read the dialogue, and immediately thought, yeah, this is a great little cowboy scene. And I read it to my then girlfriend, and she thought, yeah, that was pretty cool. So we had an idea of being an alien, but as to what alien, I had absolutely no idea. So I turned up to I think it was at Elstree, the fitting. You had what was called a life mask done, and I think it was Stuart who did it. It might have been one of his assistants, or it might have been his son even. It certainly wasn't his wife. It was definitely a male, I remember, but it might have been Stuart. But anyway, they were charming and ushered me into a small room and stuck plaster of Paris all over the front of my face and then all over the back. And when that hardened, they sort of pushed that together and poured India rubber in. So you get this sort of India rubber mask that fits over the shape of your head and fits pretty well, actually. So once that was done, I didn't think much about it at the time, because I'd also... I think that year I'd also played the Honey Monster once on a promotional tour. So I had some experience with masks. I hesitate to say that was the only other mask character I ever played in 40 years of being an actor. But that was the green mask of Greedo, or the basis for it. And then I think Stuart then took it away and built up the little bits and pieces on top of it and the spiky head, and then coloured it in green and stuck two ping pong balls on the eyes. And again, a sort of seminal story. How much of this was true, but I did hear, it might have been through fans, or it might have been through Lucasfilm itself, that Stuart was stuck for Greedo, what to do with Greedo, because I was only the alien in the original script, didn't even have a name, and he was stuck with what to do for Greedo, because he'd done so many other characters in the cantina sequence, so he was running out of ideas. But then he'd seen the day before the deadline hit. He saw an advert for Bird's Eye Peas, and the advert had a little sing-song pea that bounced around, and I think that's where he got the idea for Greedo. But that may be a seminal story. But anyway, I kind of like that, and that's how my mask came about. And I didn't then see it again until that first day of filming, when I turned up at Elstree, and my head was on a table with about 40 other characters from the cantina. All, of course, we all tried on each other's heads, but not for very long, because most people think they were boiling hot and you couldn't get them off. That's not true. They were perfectly easy to wear. It was just that they stank to high heaven, so you very quickly took them off, as it was somebody else's dribble inside your mask that you didn't really want to have much to do with. So that's how my little head came about. But before that, I had no idea of what was going to be required, and it wasn't that pleasant a process. I mean, I think later on they stuck some straws up your nose so you could breathe, but I don't even think I had that. I do remember a sort of a kind of plastic-like solution that they stuck in between your face and the plaster of Paris to make it a little easier for the whole process to happen. But it was neither very pleasant nor unpleasant, although I'd take that 100 times if given the choice against what would happen today, which is you'd have it built up from your body and be in makeup for 4 or 5 hours. So yeah, so that's how Greedo's head came about.
Brilliant. I've heard so many little stories about Stuart Freeborn's workshop. When I spoke to Dave, all that stuff, all those chemicals involved. God knows what they were laying on your face.
That's right.
So once you then got on set, did George Lucas give you much direction about how he wanted the character to be portrayed?
George Lucas, as a director, wasn't in the modern sense a sort of hands-on director. He wouldn't be at you with every little movement or every line or every bit of the scene. He was very much a company man, in that he was very clever in getting the right people around him. So he had a great lighting cameraman, he had a great first AD, he had a wonderful crew. So they all knew what they were doing. And so they would do setups for him, and George would look at it and think, yeah, I like that, or no, I don't like that, and say a few words, and things would change. So he was very much in the background of all that. And in those days, we didn't have digital screens or anything to monitor what was going on. There was only one, I think there was one camera connected to a screen that George would be looking at about 20 or 30 feet behind the Panavision camera. And so from that point of view, he wasn't intrusive, I suppose, in the process. But being a sort of smart-ass, arrogant young actor, I do remember saying to him, George, how do you want me to play this alien with, great intensity? I asked him, and he looked at me for about a minute and said, well, I played like they do in the movies, which which I thought was apt advice, given the inanity of the question on how to play a bug-headed alien. But he was certainly wonderfully amusing and very dry about some of the sequence, and he was a charming man too. So you didn't sort of feel you weren't in capable hands. I mean, I know since talking to various other actors who were involved in the very first movie, I think everybody had the same experience. And of course, George was under a huge amount of pressure then, in that he'd borrowed the money for that first film. So the money men and the producers were on his back all the time, and I know he was having a hard time during a lot of the filming. So he was pretty charming, considering I was just a snotty-nosed, a bit part actor coming in for what I thought was only going to be 5 minutes, which would then end up on the cutting room floor, and I'd never see or hear the movie again, which actually at the time was fine, because again, we all thought it was going to be Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Yeah, I guess George must have had an idea that it might look silly on set, but he had this vision in mind with all of the sound effects and the dubbing and everything and the music that would that add to the final product.
Yeah, of course. And he invented Industrial Light and Magic for that to happen, and must have had some image, as you say, in his mind about what those effects would be like. Again, remember, we'd only really had Harryhausen's Jason and the Argonauts and that sort of thing to compare what might be happening in Star Wars, even if there was the money that Jason and the Argonauts had. So we had no idea of the amazing effect of those early digital bits and pieces.
So you walked onto the Cantina set that morning. I think it was the summer of '76, wasn't it? The hot summer. My mother was giving birth to me at that very moment. And so you were on the Cantina there, working with a soon-to-be megastar. What was your impression of Harrison Ford? And what was it like working with him?
Well, I didn't know much about Harrison or Han Solo as a character, other than what I'd read in the original script. So I had no idea who the actor was who was going to be playing it. But what I do remember is, as you say, walking out on the set of the Cantina, which was the only real set in the whole of the first Star Wars movie. So it was interesting because you could actually sit in the booths and watch other bits of action happening, which was fascinating, because that was all those other aliens, which you don't really see in the movie, were pretty amazing. And they obviously, a lot of work had gone into those, and the puppets too. But when I walked out from my first little bit, which I thought wouldn't end up in the movie, And when Harrison first walked out on stage, everybody on set looked up and straight, gay, whatever, thought, my God, who is that handsome bloke walking at? We were so jealous. And a lot of us were English, and a lot of the extras obviously were English too. We're all in costumes of stormtroopers or had heads on, and we looked up at this incredibly handsome young guy thinking, my God, he's certainly going to he's going to look okay in this film, if nothing else. But no, I never heard of Harrison before, and it was only later on that I found out he'd done American Graffiti. But he was like Mark and Carrie, in that he was pretty charming and pretty nice to spend a few days with, and he was also pretty professional then. I think he was eager, obviously, to make an impression because he was leading the film, and he was one of the lead actors, and it was his first major break, so he was absolutely on point to get it right, both in his interests and from the point of view of Star Wars too. So yeah, he was pretty cool, I must say, but I'm very jealous about how he looked. Well, of course I was. That's why yeah, exactly. You've seen the pictures with me without the mask on. I tell everybody that Harrison insisted on getting the mask on me because he couldn't deal with such a handsome actor in the same sequence. So it might have been a different kettle of fish if I hadn't worn the Greedo head in the now iconic scene. There I would have been, Jamie.
See a couple of it's like a part of the early cut of that cantina scene. It's all in black and white because it was presumably just a dupe.
Yeah.
And, you can see you performing in the mask. And I've also got another behind the scenes shot that's sort of focused on Harrison. I think it says take 6. And Harrison's about to shoot you under the table. And were you wearing the mask when he was doing those singles, or did you have chance to have the mask off?
George is very kind. I mean, he let me stand behind camera and just read the script to Harrison to do his close-ups. And to be fair to Harrison, he did the same to me, even though I was in the mask and sitting sort of just looking directly into camera. But at that point where Greedo dies, I mean, I have to mention the hand shot first thing, but originally nobody shot at all, of course. All that was added on later by Industrial Light and Magic. So I had no idea how I was actually going to die. I thought, maybe it'll be a squib, because even in 76 they had detonated squibs, which would blow a hole in your chest or your arm if the Jelly Knight guard put too much explosive in the squib. But they decided to stick a dummy in at the point of where Greedo actually dies, and then fill it full of explosive and blow it up, and then put the costume back on me so I could physically fall forwards or backwards or whatever. I originally thought George was going to get me to do a sort of backwards fall because of a blast from a ray gun would push you naturally backwards, but because the costume was taken immediately off the dummy after it had exploded and was on fire, it was so hot, still smouldering, and they then poured acid onto the back of it to make it steam even more under the camera, that I decided to die pretty quickly falling forward. So I ended that scene pretty quickly.
I didn't know that. I didn't know about the acid. That's cool. That's interesting to know.
Well, if you look in the shot,
you can see it steaming away. Out. Yeah. You had quite a lot of lines to learn there in that scene as well. So
I did.
You would have had from February to around May or June then, I guess, to learn those lines.
I think I was doing a play during that time as well. So I wasn't. I mean, any movie, if you're not playing the lead, you're only ever doing 3 or 4 lines at a time. So you can virtually learn them the night before, or even on the day. Sometimes it depends, obviously, how big it was. But yeah, you're right. The little scene did take I think it did take a day or so to learn, particularly as I learned it in fluent Rhodian, and now am speaking totally in Rhodian most of the time to my family. Well, they've thought I've spoken double Dutch for the last 40 years anyway, so Rhodian makes no difference. But it was very hard to learn the Rhodian. You believe that, Jamie?
You believe anything.
Yeah.
I did see in one interview you mentioned that that scene was a bit of a rush job late on a Friday.
That's right.
Yeah.
I assumed that my little bit in the movie would be the bit with the original Jabba the Hutt, Declan Mulholland, who was a lovely little Irish actor. And we had a couple of scenes together, at least where I was just playing the henchman, virtually just standing behind him or walking up and giving him a bit of information about Han Solo, which was all underneath the Millennium Falcon, or at least the mock-up of the Millennium Falcon. And I thought that was going to be the main bit that I would be seen in with Declan. And that took quite a few days to film. And then George, I don't think it wasn't that he wasn't happy with Declan, because Declan was rather good as Jabba the Hutt, but I think he'd seen Jabba as that now iconic puppet that you see in his mind, and so obviously all those sequences had to go. So we were only left with the then now iconic scene, which we didn't know then. So we didn't spend all that much time in doing it to get it right. But I think, like all those things, when your back is against the wall, both financially and in time sequences, you tend to pull out the best the best bits of work. So looking back on it now, it's a miracle. I don't think it took Harrison very long to do it, to be quite honest. And like all those other scenes that he did in Indiana Jones and the rest of Star Wars, he did ad-lib quite a bit. And his ad-libs were very good. I don't think he ad-libbed much in our little scene. But certainly it wasn't the scene that I thought was going to finish up in the movie. So, again, very lucky.
Brilliant. Do you know which Rodian you are standing under the Falcon there?
Yeah, that's definitely me, the one nearest the action. I did say to George, because that now appears after I die in the cantina. Look very carefully and you'll see me die in the cantina, and then you'll see Greedo in the next scene underneath the Millennium Falcon, with next to Harrison. And I said, George, I think that's me there in that scene, and I've just died. He said, oh no, they all look the same, Rodians, and wear the same clothes. It's a very poor planet.
And do you know if that was... There's a scene I've got of Alec Guinness wielding the lightsaber at the bar, chopping the guy's arm off. And there's a Rodian that leans in and sort of looks around.
No, I don't think that was me. I can't remember. I know there were a couple of extras dressed in almost the same gear, so that could easily have been one of them. To be absolutely honest, I really can't remember. It could have been me, but I don't remember doing that. But then 40 years ago, I don't remember what I did last week, let alone what I did 40 years ago. So it could equally have been me, but don't hold me to that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't remember what I was doing yesterday. So I saw you also mention in an interview about a deleted scene where you had a bit of a shootout with Harrison. Can you talk a little bit about that?
That again was in the. I think that was in the scene with Declan. In that I remember having a sort of mock gunfight with Harrison underneath the Millennium Falcon. Then a whole pile of stormtroopers come running out, and we turn and fire on them. Unless that's a complete figment of my imagination, which I don't think it was. I think we actually spent a morning on doing that. But yes, and that wasn't seen in the final cuts of any of the even the deleted scenes. So yeah, there was quite a little bit originally.
I guess I get the impression that George was experimenting with a few things. You know, you got the Greedo in the bar scene, you got the Jabba scene, this potential shootout as you describe it. Maybe he was just giving himself some options, because I know when he worked on American Graffiti, he was very well known for just shooting everything.
Yeah.
And then making it in the edit.
I think that's exactly.
Possible.
I think that's exactly what happened with us. I think I know, talking to some of the other guys who are around, particularly to Peter Diamond, who was a stunt director at the time, and Peter was. I said, "Did you do any stuff that didn't appear in the film, Peter?" He said, "Oh God, yes, we did so much stuff." And he told me about a character that he played called the Electric Light Bulb Man, where he wore a costume that was virtually about 300 light bulbs, all of which lit up, and he was going to do some sequence with that. But of course, as soon as they all lit up, it nearly burned burned him to a cinder. So I think they very soon realised that character wasn't going to fly. But yeah, I'm sure that's exactly what happened. That George filmed so much stuff that he still got to this day at Skywalker Ranch. I know there was, as I say, the original script looked like the Telephone Directory. It had thousands of scenes, which actually I should have a look at, and I haven't really read it in full from that day to this.
Yeah, like I was looking at some of the scripts last night, preparing some of these questions, and I think there's a fourth draft where you're just mentioned as alien.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just an alien. Even on the call sheet, it just says alien. I think it was only later when George realised that he was actually going to include the scenes in the movie that he decided to give Greedo a name. And I don't know where Greedo came from.
Yeah,
I'm sure George can tell you that.
Holland says, doesn't he, why did you have to fry poor Greedo like that?
Yes.
I managed to reconstruct that scene because it's never been shown in its entirety, that scene. And there was some on a CD-ROM from the 90s, and there was some on E! Entertainment in the States, and there was some and I put it all together.
Wow.
To this day, it's the only way you can see it. Lucasfilm have never released it. So when did Greedo re-enter your life?
Well, that's a very poignant, pertinent question. I think for a good 10 years, he didn't have much effect. I mean, like, I didn't go to the premiere. I was actually working on something else, but I was away on holiday about a year after the movie was released. So it must have been 78 or somewhere, with my then girlfriend, now wife, and we were in Greece, and we were on a beach somewhere, and some guys came up to us, and we were chatting to them, and they were American, and they said, "What do you do?" And we said, "Oh, well, we're actors." And they said, "Oh yeah, have you done anything that we know?" And I said, "God, no, absolutely not." I said, "I've done quite a bit of theatre and a few bits of TV, and I mostly work on stage." Oh, I did a movie about a couple of years ago. It was called Star something, or Blue Harvest originally, I think. And then they said, "You were in Star Wars?" And I said, "Is that what it's called? Is it Star?" So I only found out on a beach about a year later that it was going to be a little more than ending up on the cutting room floor. So after about 2 months, and when we got back from Greece, I went to Leicester Square and saw it in the Odeon Leicester Square with the rest of the punters. And like everybody else, I was just completely blown away once the Star Destroyer goes over your head, and on and on and on. And I think that captured my attention from that point on. And then I was so excited, thinking, well, actually, I think I'm in this movie, that when it came to my bit and I was actually in the scene, I jumped up and said, "That's me," which to this day I am ashamed of. But I would probably do the same thing again. So it didn't have much effect for 4 or 5 years, I think, because obviously it was a success straight away and everybody loved the movie. And then they got into gear into making Empire and Return of the Jedi, and it was going to sort of obviously have a life after A New Hope. But it didn't have that much effect on me until I think I was working with Jeremy Bulloch. I did a play with Jeremy for an actor called Derek Nimmo, who was a sort of well-known TV star at the time. And Derek ran a company that toured all over the world. And actors used to like to do it because we went to beautiful places and stayed in wonderful hotels and just had to do a little play in the evenings. And I found myself doing one of these with Jeremy. And he said to me one night, he said, "Paul, you were in Star Wars, weren't you?" And I said, yeah, I was. He said, "Why don't you do conventions?" And I said, "What's a convention?" So it was Jeremy that got me involved on the whole convention circuit, and sort of more involved with Star Wars than I then was. I was just sort of trying to carry on working as a jobbing actor at the time, really, and continuing to work mostly abroad and the rest of the world. I spent quite some time in Hong Kong doing theatre there and doing TV and the odd little commercials and bits in films and things. So really, it was Jeremy that got me into all that a bit later on. And at that point, I realised that Star Wars was going to have something of an effect on my life. But then 10 years after that, when the directors and the casting directors and the agents had all grown up with Star Wars, then they found it a lot more interesting. And we used to get a lot more inquiries because of being in that original movie. But it did take a long time.
Great. It's like a nice little retirement plan now, I would imagine, for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's better than legal life or whatever.
Yeah.
Yes, it certainly is. I can only thank Star Wars for the gift that continues to give.
Yeah, amazing. One thing I wanted to ask about was obviously there are some of the scenes with a more articulated mask, and that was Maria de Aragon shot in
Yes,
LA,
that wasn't me. No, that's right.
You've met with Maria, though, is that right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Well, for a long time, I think we only ever assumed that there was only ever one of us as Greedo until I did meet Maria, and I said, "Oh, you did." Did you play Greedo? And she said, and then she explained about them doing the retakes later on in America about a year after I'd finished. And then I realised, of course, that the mask that I'd had done was never going to be used as in close-up because none of it worked. So that's how I think Maria came to be doing those reshoots, because the articulation of the ears and the nose all happened much later than when I filmed it. And I think that was the problem that George was left with when he cut the whole Jabba the Hutt sequences, that he was really only left with that now iconic scene, and certainly not enough close-ups of either Greedo when he speaks or Harrison when he responds. And so obviously that was what Maria did, I think, about a year later. But yeah, I hadn't really thought about it much, because of course a lot of movies that you do, especially if you're not playing the lead, or secondly, if you're in a sort of one or two scenes, generally you think, oh well, I'm not going to be in that film, that's going to end up on the cutting room floor. So I kind of didn't give it much thought until much later on. Until then, I met Maria and we did a signing together, actually. But yeah, occasionally we bump into each other and exchange a few stories. But I haven't seen her for a long time now, so I hope she's still all right.
I made a feature-length sort of behind-the-scenes thing on Star Wars back in, when was it, 2011, called Star Wars Begins. And I found that photo of Maria in the Greedo costume with her heels on.
Yeah, I used to tell people that was me, of course, but on Fridays, everyone needs a hobby. It's fine one day a week, but, more than one day a week, no. And I find the heels just uncomfortable to wear at the weekend. That's how I used to get away with it anyway. But no, of course, yeah, that's obviously Maria.
Yeah, it's amazing how this film has lasted. I mean, to you back then, presumably it was just another job. You just come off Jack and Ori, you were doing Star Wars and then moving on to something else. It still amazes me to this day that I'm still interested in it. I mean,
it amazes us, Jamie. How do you think we feel? Yes, it is quite extraordinary, and it's the question. I think it's the most, apart from who shot first, it's the most asked question is why the longevity of Star Wars? Why? And it is a difficult question to answer. I think Star Wars has sort of gone into that category of both, not only a sort of film history, of cultural history now, and so many people invested so much into it in their childhoods and kind of grew up with it in the same way as we people of my generation, my age, grew up with The Wizard of Oz and the Bogart films and the Hitchcock stuff, which to me were the sort of the iconic films at the time. Is that Star Wars has gone into that realm now, because it's certainly one of the few films worldwide that you mention those two words in any language. You can be in Lapland or you can be in Vietnam or Venezuela, and people know what you're talking about if you just say those two words, which is extraordinary, really, for any movie to achieve that status. And I think it's due to the fact that George unashamedly drew on the history and the mythology of nationalities and countries, and that mythology has never gone away. You know, the constant interplay between good and evil, with good sometimes being in the ascendant and sometimes with evil being in the ascendant, and the great characters like Darth Vader and the great good characters like Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Princess Leia and Harrison. I mean, those characters can be seen in any other mythology you'd like to name. And I also think he owes a little bit to Lord of the Rings in the Star Wars saga. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's hung around for so long. And they were wonderfully good movies when they were filmed, and they still stand up to this day. Certainly when I don't think I've ever sat down to see them all the way through from that point to now. But the bits that I constantly see, I'm amazed at how well they still stand up to the passage of 40 years. And I can see them being around for another 20 or 30 years, maybe even longer, certainly until I'm pushing the daisies up. And incidentally, I have to say, on my tombstone, it will say, even though I've done I've appeared in every Shakespearean play. I've played Eugène Onegin. I've been Charles Swan in Proust's La Recherche du Temps Perdu. I've been in every theatre across this country, in many theatres across the world, quite a few other TV bits and pieces. On my tombstone, it will say, "Here lies Greedo. He shot first." But on the back, it'll say, "Or did he?"
It's funny, you talk about being in all those different roles. One of my best mates is in one of the main parts in Hamilton on the West End at the moment.
Oh, wonderful! Yes,
he got that gig. I mean, it's incredible that he's got to that point. The guy who played it in America won the Tony for it, and he's up for the movie at the moment. He's a massive Star Wars fan. It's in fact how we sort of joined forces, as it were, no pun intended. And
fantastic.
He says, "Oh God, I'd love to be in a Star Wars movie." When I told him I was interviewing you, he said, "Oh, that is amazing."
Oh, I'm so well. Send him my regards and say I have every admiration for him being in Hamilton, because it is fantastic.
Oh, it's incredible.
But no, you're right. In my queues at some of the conventions, I've had the most extraordinary people. I looked up once, and there was Brian May waiting for an autograph. It's quite extraordinary, the people who, I think it's because they shared a childhood with us. That's why it means quite so much to them, and that childhood resonates forever, doesn't it? Those childhood feelings never go away. So very lucky.
Absolutely. One last question I just meant to ask you: were you asked to play any other parts? Because I know some people doubled up as different characters in the cantina, for instance. And
no, once they got rid of me, George couldn't wait to get me out of the door. No, the bastards! They never offered. No, actually, that's not quite true. I did have a chat with the lovely producer of The Force Awakens, Brad Burke, just before they were halfway through filming, and I'd sent him a message saying, good luck with the new movie. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. And he rang me up here one night and said, "Paul, I thought it was some friend had just taken the piss, so I nearly told him to fuck off." But fortunately, I didn't. And I suddenly realised it was Brad, and I thought there and then I should have said, "Oh, for God's sake, bring Greedo back now. He deserves an extra airing." But I think he's going to get an extra airing in the Han Solo movie, but that won't be me. But that's fine, because I've retired now, and it should be someone newer and more athletic, certainly.
Yeah, it does seem to me that would be a missed opportunity if they didn't have Greedo in there.
Yeah,
given that there's that sort of familiarity, they know each other, and
exactly. And he was the nearest to actually getting rid of Han Solo, wasn't he? If only he'd shot first. If only he'd done that, Jamie, it would have been my franchise entirely. I would have run off with the whole thing. It would have been...
Who knows what could have happened?
Greedo and Princess Leia, Greedo on the top penthouse of the Death Star, Greedo hand in hand with Darth Vader. I think it would have been a different movie.
I think there's a comic series there. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that, Paul.
Jamie, it was lovely. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Hope you enjoyed that nice chat with Paul I had back in March 2018. I enjoyed it. He's a fun guy and he doesn't take it too seriously. And like many of those guys that starred in that original film, it is interesting to me that it's become a bit of a pension fund for them, going to all the conventions, maybe not in 2020, but hopefully for more years to come. For next episode, as I said before, hoping to speak to Ben Dimmock, stuntman and stunt coordinator. Also trying to line up some other guests at the moment. But do, send me your suggestions. If you've got anybody you think might fit the bill of the Filmumentaries podcast, then do let me know. You can do that via my Filmumentaries Facebook page, by leaving a comment on filmumentaries.com, by talking to me on Twitter at JamieSWB, and you can find Filmumentaries on Instagram as well. Do give me a shout, and let me know who you think would be interesting. Meanwhile, I'm going to continue to delve into IMDb and see if I can find some more guests myself. I hope you can join me next time, and thanks again for everybody who's supporting me on Patreon. If you can support me, patreon.com/Jamie Benning. $1, $2, anything you can contribute really does help me get these things done. And thanks, of course, to all of you who've been in touch to say that you're enjoying the podcast. It really does bring a smile to my face and makes this thing a whole lot easier. Okay, take care, be good, be nice to each other.